Our next speaker, RAOUL, is the Senior IT Manager at Citi, and today he'll be talking to us about a presentation titled My Child and the Lesson of the Future. Please let's welcome RAOUL.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Is the mic on? Can you all hear me? Okay, so there's the presentation over there. Sorry, just getting a little bit orientated. My name is RAOUL. I'm the head of technology for an international bank, Citi. I got involved with my daughter's school about 7 or 8 years ago when one evening I was helping out at the fundraising desk, and they said, why don't you join the school governing body? Who here is on a school governing body? Couple, okay. You get sucked into the school politics. My daughter's school is a school up the road here called Brian Evan Primary. I don't know if some of you may or may not know it. And I got involved primarily to assist the governing body from a perspective of finance, have the meetings, see where we are. And this is where I started to encounter the technology that we had at the time in the school, the limitations that we had, and where we were actually going to take it going forward. So what I did is in about 2013, I presented a strategy to the school governing body, which then was accepted and adopted. But up until that point, it took around about 1.5 years to actually build this plan for the school. So my presentation this afternoon is My Child and the Lesson of the Future. I think we took a step back, and when we started looking at it, we started thinking about the classroom of the future. We started imagining what the physical components would look like. And then after that, we actually changed our view and said, let's have a look at it from a lesson. What is actually happening in the classroom? There's a lesson between a teacher and a number of students, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean, for example, that we want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and replace certain types of technology. Perhaps it was chalk that's been around for maybe 200 years. But we looked at all the aspects of what was in the classroom and tried to understand it from a point of view of our vision. And what I'd like to try and do today is share some of our failures and current practices. Okay, so this is going forward. No? Okay. Oh, yes. Okay, sorry. So, some of the key challenges, as the previous speaker has just mentioned. Our children were becoming more and more engaged in technology. As you can see, it's automatically going forward. I don't know how to stop it. This is what technology does to you. So basically, like you say, games, Pokemon, Minecraft, YouTube, Facebook, Pinterest, etc. This was really, really getting into mainstream with our children. So what we had to try and do then is try and see how we were going to excite our children, how we were going to innovate in our classroom, how we were going to change what we were doing. We went and spoke to a number of schools, and what we often found is schools had rolled out tablets. The typical thing is the mom comes to you in the parking lot and says, when are we going to get tablets? We would say, guys, before we just start with the actual technology, let's have a look at what we actually want to do in the classroom with these tablets. So we had to take a step back because we found many schools were quite prepared to buy a tablet, put in technology, and then try and figure out what was actually going to be done between the teacher and the child and how was that going to be facilitated. Okay. So there were significant challenges. Okay. There was the changing educational paradigms. Oh, there you go. Understanding what technology fits into the production of education. What I often do is when I go into a school, I start talking about what is actually happening in the classroom and how is technology being used to facilitate that lesson of the future. So we then started looking at the number of products and solutions. I don't know if any of you have been to the Sandton Convention Center. They have a large technology education expo. In about the October timeframe, you'll find perhaps over 100 vendors trying to sell various solutions for the schools. And what we found is that our school and many of the schools that I've dealt with, the principals, the the technology person sitting on site, gets completely confused about where we should be going, what we should be trying to do. And so what we really started to look at was, what did we want to try and achieve? What strategy did we need to put in place? Okay? Where did we want to be sometime in the future? So that was exactly what we did. We had to ask ourselves, where were we? What did we have? And what did we want to achieve in the end? Now, we said, well, we can't afford it. I think the other gentleman mentioned as well, cost is an issue, okay? But you start to build a strategy, perhaps over 2 or 3 years, that allowed us to actually implement things in phases, okay? So when we had a look at our classroom, and as you can see, this is a photograph I took of my daughter's grade 3 classroom at the time. And just like the previous speaker mentioned, I mean, this is not incredibly exciting, is it? I mean, you can even see the old roller screen. Remember when we still had foils and overhead projectors? That was the technology of the sort of 80s, I think, 90s. And then it got phased out. And really often, that technology got phased out and was replaced with nothing. We went back to blackboards. Some schools got advanced and actually had a whiteboard with a pen, but it was effectively the same thing. So my poor daughter was sitting there trying to be enthusiastic, looking at a classroom like that. Okay, yes, the teachers do put up some pretty pictures along the top and some posters, but in the end, it didn't really engage with what we wanted to do. So what did we want to achieve? And perhaps we read some papers and we looked at it, and perhaps one of the greatest difficulties we found from a school perspective was really, how do we light a fire in our children from a point of view of education, learning, and being engaged? Now, the school does fairly well from an academic perspective. We pass all the ANA reports. I don't even know the names of these things. We're in the top quartile from the country's perspective. So we had to decide, when we put in this technology, are we actually going to try and improve the academic results? And from that perspective, at this point in time, we didn't see that was a measure that we would actually try and hold ourselves against. We were trying more to excite our students, light the fire, and make them more effective and more efficient and more creative in their classroom environment. So we took some pictures, we had a look around, and we said, okay, look at these fantastic schools and classrooms, wall-to-wall video presentations, classrooms that nobody sits in a row anymore, desks that even have tablets built into them. So we were trying to understand, would putting this type of technology into the classroom actually change anything? So we then decided to take a step back and have a look at what actually happens in the classroom. And we basically determined, from our perspective, you've got basically the teacher, and there she's behind the traditional blackboard, her brain trying to communicate with a number of children's other brains, get a concept across, teach them something, learn something. And of course, we looked at the various learning pyramids about things like retention of information, from lecturing, from reading, etc., to the bottom. We looked at all the educational paradigms that were available, and we tried to understand what is actually happening there. It's a one-to-many relationship, and also, of course, the teacher also learns on the way back, because she's also learning from her children, she's learning about them, she's getting to understand what they know or don't know. So there's a two-way process between the two. And then, of course, the other thing as well is of course, the actual content itself, the actual books, as we saw them, the textbooks. In the schools that you work in, do most of you still have textbooks? Do you use textbooks? Okay. Typically, there's a curriculum that you have to have some content, and it needs to be learned, and it needs to be understood, and it needs to be explored. Okay. So what we did is we started looking at various models, and we adopted this SAMR model, the SAMR model, which then started to look at the concepts of using technology. And this has been put together by Dr. Rubin, who looked at basically various levels of the use of technology in a school. So for example, here we've got the S model, which is the substitution. Technology acts as a direct substitute with no functional change. So we started thinking about, for example, a tablet, for example. Books could be on a tablet, yes, e-books, e-pubs, etc., and it would provide basically only a direct substitute. Instead of reading it in a physical paper book, it would be read through a piece of glass, okay? And then we started to try and understand how that could be used from an augmentation perspective, and how the tool could then substitute with some functional improvements. In other words, how could things be improved by using an e-book on a tablet in that particular case? And this discussion went around from the blackboard. In other words, should we replace it with a smart board, an interactive smart board where the children can touch the screen? Okay, because that would then start moving our introduction of technology from substitution to augmentation. In other words, if we put in a smart board and the teacher was basically just presenting a lesson like I am now, rather than actually writing it up on the board, it would be basically just a direct change with some augmentation, because she could prepare the lesson beforehand and she wouldn't spend most of her time perhaps with the back to her children writing up on the chalkboard. So we looked at this model, and then we looked at the higher levels, and what we found was as you move up the model, the modification allows for significant task redesign. And this comes around this concept of the flipped classroom. In other words, you can perhaps give your child a video to look at or a poem to listen to on their tablets. They go home, listen to it, and then you come back, and instead of listening to the poem in the classroom, you actually discuss the poem. Exactly. So it becomes more of a modification of the action, but it's a significant redesign. It's quite a change in the redesign of it. And then finally, you've got the redefinition area, which we looked at, which this really allows completely new tasks to be created. This is the concept, and I've spoken to some schools where they've got learning blogs, where all the grade 8s, for example, are sharing information about their, let's say, their vegetable gardens that they're growing on a combined collaborative blog. So what we found was, though, that we've seen many schools have aimed in this area. They're doing all the exciting gee whiz type stuff. You know, all the, let's get a blog, let's get Google Classroom going, but guys, what about the basic books, the curriculum? And what we found in these schools is, and we've been to a number of them, is that when you go and speak to a school like that, you'll find Mr. Smith, for example, the math teacher, is doing incredible things with OneNote. I say, that's great. Okay? And then Mrs. Jane is doing something with the blog. But then there's a whole lot of other people, 20 or 30 other teachers, that are left out in between. So you've got a couple of innovators driving, okay, but it's not standard across the school. So we had to then rethink our strategy and say, guys, what can we put into the school that's going to make a fundamental difference, building it from the ground up? Let's not jump straight into, you know, blogs and the Minecraft gaming options, etc. Let's have a look at what is going to happen in the classroom. Okay? So our key learning was we needed to, from our perspective, to see how we could connect the teacher with the curriculum with the students. Basically, that was it. And we started looking for various solutions, and we said, if we want to use the substitution model and the redefinition or the augmentation model and to move up this pyramid or up this hierarchy, this is what we should be doing. So what we did is we came up with a very simplified strategy, and we came up with 4 layers in our tech environment. We had the core infrastructure layer. That's typically your fiber, your servers, your cloud connectivity, etc. Often what happens is this gets forgotten about. The thing is that most parents and most governing bodies want to know when they can get tablets into the classroom. You typically should start looking at how the various layers are going to be used to assist each and every other layer. Don't just go and give tablets and say, well, we've got some Wi-Fi and we've got tablets. We had to look at how the teacher was going to interface into the environment. And we had to decide whether it was going to be laptops, whether they're going to give them tablets, whether they're going to have PCs in their rooms, classrooms, etc. Then the core aspect, and this is what I'm doing today, is presenting to you using a presentation or some form of screen. It was the learners and the teacher interface where we were replacing effectively the blackboards with a smart board. And by the way, in most of these cases, you'll see we never threw the baby out with the bathwater. We still had a board that you can physically write on with a pen. because many teachers are obviously very nervous at the time. They said they wouldn't be ready for this. It would take them time to build up their curriculum and change, etc. So we included both the whiteboards for writing on and smart boards as well. But if you have a look at the teachers, for example, teachers actually had nothing in their classroom. There was a tech room where they could go and log on, and we replaced that with Office 365 and tablets. Obviously, with the core infrastructure, we put in fiber, we went from ADSL to fiber, and we put in Wi-Fi as well. Our focus then was on using outsourced service providers like Dial-A-Nerd, small to medium-sized companies, where we don't get involved with the actual day-to-day running of the actual servers and infrastructure. Many schools have a tech guy that they've employed, but he can't typically drive this model into an environment. And in all of these cases, we always look to see at the SAMR model, how was it actually going to be applied? Okay? So what we did is we came up with a system, and when it comes to the final component of it, is we're looking for an integrated system to be able to connect pubs to the teacher and to the kids. So before we had workbooks and textbooks, now we've got tablets and workbooks. So they're still writing in their workbooks. Okay, they're not, we haven't given up on them writing altogether. There was a lot of resistance for that. So this tablet actually complements them in this environment. And we actually ended up, you put it in a system called My eBooks. It's a South African company. And what it does is it allows the teacher to push content directly into the textbooks. And that's a classic case of the example of augmentation happening, where a teacher is now, for example, adding content into a textbook for the child. Here's an example of a teacher's console who's then pushing through the My eBook system. This is my daughter's, Georgia Jennifer, her library. Comes up automatically on her tablet, and she can see all of her books over there. Whenever there's a little blue dot, for example, that means there's been additional content pushed into it. So the Afrikaans Sonder Grense, for example, this particular example here, she's got a number of additional content. The teacher has pushed an Afrikaans poem, and this allows you to take yourself up to the next level. So now she's got the poem at home. It's downloaded on the Wi-Fi. It doesn't need Wi-Fi at home for the kids that don't have Wi-Fi at home, and they can then listen to the poem offline and then come and discuss the poem back at school. So that's this whole concept of moving up that SAMR model by using something. But we started with the foundation of just replacing the book with a tablet, basically reading the book through the glass. The other thing that's very important in the system is that it allowed us to have statistics. There you can see, for example, I can see the number of minutes my child has spent into the book, the number of resources that she has opened or hasn't opened. She can see this as well, by the way. And you can also see what the class average is. I can see that the class average has spent 400 minutes in the book, and my child has spent 700 minutes in the book. And it gives you an overall statistic of how engaged the child is in the various books. So you can actually click on statistics, and you've got various systems. You've got your library, you've got your teacher resources, if there's additional information that they want to push down to the child. So really what it did is it allowed us to take a system, and we put this across the school, okay, from grades 5, 6, and 7. Grades 4, we're still debating. Grades 3, 2, and 1, they're a little bit little to be carrying tablets around. This is a bring your own device type strategy. We don't supply the devices, the parents supply them. It works on iOS, Android, and Windows. So what we did is we put the system in as a foundation. So you didn't have these pockets of Mr. Jones doing something with OneNote and another teacher doing something with, let's say, Minecraft for education. And you found that there was this huge gap in between. Okay, I'm being signaled now to roll up. But basically, what it allowed us to do was to move up from substitution to augmentation and even into the modification phase. That's the area that we're exploring now. But the system is a system that we put in place, but it was built on those layers. So we didn't just jump in and start giving tablets. We had to look at how the whole system was going to be integrated and how it would actually move us up in those levels in the SAMR model. And so this has completely changed the way the school is now teaching. The kids are a lot more engaged, they're a lot more excited, etc. One of our challenges, of course, child looks like she's studying, and actually she's playing Minecraft at the back of the classroom. Okay? So there are systems in there that actually can prevent that. Obviously, we put in all the firewalls, etc. So this is where we are at the moment, and thank you very much. That's my presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any questions? Did any of you know? Sorry, yes, sir? Yes. Well, you see, we started off in 2013, putting in the smart boards. And one of the learnings from that was that without content, smartboard is great, it's fantastic. Many of the teachers jumped in, but they found that trying to create a PowerPoint presentation for every single lesson was incredibly different. So we went out and found a content library. I think there's one for primary schools called My Cyber Wall, for example, and all the lessons are already there. So we went through a phase where we put all this technology in, we trained them up, and then we left them. And then we found that, well, nothing was really happening. Everybody was teaching exactly the same. So that was one of the key learnings. We make sure that it's not only training, but it's also content. We put in basically the equivalent of a high-definition TV, DSTV, but we were left watching TV1, basically. You know, there was no content for it. So we had to look at what content, and we could make it easier for the teacher to go and try and have a teacher prepare 200 or 100 lessons now in PowerPoint, even if they were collaborating and sharing, etc. So that started off in 2013. 2014 it went in. Then it went through a bit of a lull. I wasn't I was focusing on my normal job, and we realized 2 years later nothing had really fundamentally changed. Okay, and so then we decided that we were going to drive it from the bottom up. We were going to we had the infrastructure, we had the Wi-Fi in place. We were now going to drive it from the children down. So we weren't going to drive it from the top down, but from the bottom up. And we said, look, if we can find a system that will allow us to integrate the publisher's books, and we don't tell the parents to go and order these things online. We include it in our school fees, and the child just clicks on the app, and everything downloads. I've gone to schools where they say, yes, it's optional. Of course you can order an EPUB. I said, of course anybody can. Now you've got to get out your credit card number, you've got to get the ISBN number, you've got to look it up, you get the wrong one, it's not the right version. You know, you don't need that. Every child has got exactly the same book. Okay, so when they open it, they all see it. Okay. And we have got a CSI policy in place, so with children that are non-fee paying, etc., we've had to budget, what is one of the other learnings from there, budget for a certain number of 10% of our children tablets, that we would then fund through the school to make sure that everybody had an equal chance. So basically it started in 2013. 2014 it got going. 15 it dropped off. 16 we now initiated this. So we went through kind of that initial hump, dropped off again, and this took a total of 3 months to put in. Once we had the Wi-Fi, etc., but you can build a strategy. You know, if you need R500,000 for Wi-Fi and you don't have it this year, then start planning now, build a strategy over a period of time, and see what you need to do from a fees perspective.